Hello guys, and welcome back to our series where we're modelling this Suzuki truck. We're on part 5 now, and I'm determined in this episode for us to make a lot more progress. We're going to be focusing on the front of the truck this time, hopefully adding all of these details, or most of them, at least cutting out the shapes, the headlights, getting the front done so that we can start doing the back of the truck and move on. Right off the bat, we're going to start off just by doing the headlights. I am going to start making the shape for the headlights. So to do that, I'm just going to create a cube and we're going to make a guide shape for ourselves, just to kind of outline where this is going to go before we actually start cutting in to the shape of the model. So our blueprints actually, they have a different type of headlight to the one that I want. The one that I want to create is a bit more like this. So I'm going to be trying to aim for this sort of shape instead. It looks like it doesn't come over quite as much. It's got a bit more of a simplistic shape to it. Okay, so like I said, we're just making the shape for this. The reason why I like to create a guide is because sometimes it can be a little daunting just to start cutting into the model, and I'd like to define the shape ideally as well, as good as possible first, before I actually start making any more drastic changes to the shape of the mesh and start cutting things up. Okay, let's go ahead and delete everything for the time being. I think for some parts of this video I am going to time-lapse it. I'm obviously going to, it's still a tutorial, so I want to teach you guys the important parts, but speed up the parts which are a bit slow and aren't necessarily adding anything. Okay, that seems to roughly be the shape that I'm after, just comparing to my reference. One thing I like to do sometimes is I'll zoom out to roughly the same kind of amount as my reference, and then just kind of compare scales of things. It's a good thing to have your reference like kind of the same size as your viewport sometimes, if you have a second screen, or even, you know, on top of the same screen. It looks like it's roughly about the right size, or at least I'm quite happy with that. So the next thing we need to do is actually just round off the corners on this. Actually, we don't need rounded corners there. This one here has a particularly rounded edge, something like this. This one here is also a little rounded. Something like that, but not quite as rounded. Okay, cool. So now that we have our guide, we are going to use this as a base, and we're going to cut into the shape of the mesh. That'll be where our headlight goes. And the reason I'm doing this first is so that there's a few other panel lines that we need to add here, and it's just going to be easier once we have this cut in. It's probably the harder shape to add at this point, so we'll just get it done out of the way so we don't have to worry about it. And yeah, so let's go ahead and cut this into the model. Okay, so we've added a few lines in, just to begin with. I haven't done the corners yet because I just want to make sure this is looking okay with what we have. And you can see here, again, we're going to need to do some topo cleanup, but that should be okay. So we're going to kind of, we've put 4 divisions in here to the guide, but we're just going to be taking into account what we actually have with our current topology. So that's kind of roughly how many we're going to have instead. Okay, and I always like to do the cleanup after deleting the faces. Okay, here we might need to have actually less. But you know what, I think that's okay. I'm not too worried about that. So this is the shape. We'll go ahead and, in fact, what I'll do is, because we're going to need the headlight here, we're going to go ahead and actually just remove this as a piece. That's one thing I like to do, especially when we're working with curved surfaces like this. We'll keep this. We're just going to extract it rather than straight up delete it, because it will come in handy later when we actually need to create this headlight, right? Because obviously it's still flush to the surface, or it extends a little bit out of the surface, and trying to recreate it would be a bit of a pain. So we have this perfect little shape here that we can just use right off the bat. So I'm just going to extract it, if I can remember where that is. Edit mesh, extract. Then we'll just delete all the history, remove everything out of here. Okay, cool. So there is our headlight shape cut out. And we've got a bit of topology cleanup to do, but it's not too bad. And you can see things aren't really pinching too badly. This here might need some cleanup. We'll maybe pull that out and down. We will just need to quickly tweak this. But we can just snap that over, so that's okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and fix this up. I'll probably time-lapse this at this point, so you guys aren't waiting a million years for me to clean up the topology. And hopefully it'll just make the episode flow a bit smoother. Okay, so we've cleaned up this area a little bit for the time being. Things are still looking pretty smooth. Well, we can go ahead and delete that guide now because we don't need him anymore. I'm going to do a bit of cleanup on this as well. Just making sure that we keep the same number of vertices, right? Because we need this to be able to smooth with the shape. So we'll clean it up, and I'll probably time-lapse that too. Just so you guys can see what I'm doing, but so I'm not waffling the whole time. Okay, so we've cleaned up the topology of the headlight panel as well. So what I'm going to do now is start doing the front panels. And these are pretty similar, it seems, across the different versions. Obviously the shape is going to be a little bit different because you can see here we still have the same kind of layout as this front piece, but instead of it following the shape of the headlight, it's just going to come up straight. Bit of a gap. We've also got this panel line here. Let's start with the easy one. Let's put this one in down here. Alrighty, so that is going to go pretty much... a little hard to tell, actually. It looks like the line should be here, actually. So we'll go ahead and add a cut here. In fact, we'll probably add a little seam, or a gap even. And then we can just go ahead and delete those faces because we don't need them. Okay, next one. So there's another line up here. Quick and easy way to do this is literally just to grab the multi-cut tool. If you hold down shift, you can cut straight across like this. That, to me, seems like it needs to roughly go round about here. So we'll just go, boop, just like that. Okay, what I like to do in this case is just select the whole edge, hold down space, go to edit mesh, then detach to separate those bits out. Okay, now we can go in and clean up the topology. First of all, we'll go ahead and actually separate this part out into a separate piece. And then this cleanup here actually won't be too bad. We can literally probably just delete some of these edges, honestly. And then this is a quad already. Since this is a straight line, we can probably just bring this right up as well, honestly. In fact, we might even just be able to do an edit edge flow. Not too bothered about that. You know, and it used to be that I would really worry about these edges not aligning, but it's fine. Honestly, no big deal. Same here as well. This one we may need to keep. But, no, thinking about it, that should be okay. Okay, cool. So that is our next gap. And then the last one we need to do is one straight here. This looks like it also just goes straight up. So we'll do this one from the top. Just going to turn off the grid because that's getting a bit intrusive. Alright, so we'll do the exact same thing as before. We'll just cut directly across here, roughly. We don't want it to be down here, though. We'll get rid of that. Let's just make sure we got the right line. This one. We just need that cut up there. And then, exactly as before, we'll just double-click the edge, edit mesh, detach, and then we will extract that off. So now that is also a separate piece. So you kind of end up having a bunch of just little panels separated, which really, actually, does make your life a lot easier, even if it is a little bit daunting to begin with. This guy, unfortunately, we might need that. That's kind of annoying. I wonder if we bring this line a bit further over so it comes back from there. I think we'll do that, actually, just to make our lives a bit easier. We'll get rid of that line, and we might in fact just add it ourselves. We kind of know which direction it needs to go in, right? Maybe we'll have it go across like that. That'll probably be a little bit easier. Okay, so we are going to work on adding in this vent grill guy here. It's pretty much the same as our blueprints, and fortunately, might just be a happy accident, we already have these faces which line up mysteriously perfectly. So we just need to snap that vertice there, do a little bit of cleanup with some of these. We pretty much have that shape area already just to cut out. Oh, we've got one pesky vertice just out of place there, but we can just fix that real quick. We'll give it a quick look over just to make sure. Okay, this actually needs to come up at a bit of an angle, which we can do right now. We'll go ahead and just go blip, like so. Then we should Actually, also, this can come down a tad. So let's go ahead and run an edge along here. Annoyingly, it won't let me go the whole way across, but that's okay. We'll just do it ourselves. And then the rest looks like it lines up pretty good. Okay, cool. So now we can just go ahead and select everything that we need to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to extrude this in, like so. And then just make sure we have this coming in around about the correct amount, which it seems like we do. Maybe a tad bit more. Alrighty, I'm pretty happy with that. We have a bit of topology cleanup to do, but it's not too bad. I think we won't have this edge run up here like that. I don't particularly like how that ends. For the time being, I'll just go ahead and delete that. This here as well, because we need to add a bit of a bend to these. These need to be rounded. Also, you may have noticed since we're working on a half, you've got some extra faces here. Just go ahead and delete those. We obviously don't need them. We also need some rounded corners up here, 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 and here. So what we'll do is, I think the radius for those corners is a little different in each section. In fact, the corners here are quite small, so we won't do those for the time being. Let's start with these. We'll delete this as well, just for the time being, because I think it will make our lives a bit easier when it comes to doing this. We're just going to bevel. In fact, we'll delete these as well. We'll just bevel this. Let's add 2 divisions. And we'll go for the fraction, we'll put that all the way to 1. Looks like we've got some vertices here overlapping, so we're just going to go ahead and merge those. Always check for stuff like that when that happens, because you do not want that. We can then go and quickly clean up this. Like so. That should work reasonably well for us. But what I think I might do, actually, is have this edge come up here. We'll introduce another edge. Basically, I don't want this running all the way across. It will just look a little bit ugly, so ideally we don't have that happen. I think I want to edit the edge flow on here, but we might have to do that in a moment first. So we've got a bit of topo cleanup to do here. We might need another edge, or another edge there, but that's okay. And then that can go across just like so. We'll pull this over a little bit, just so it has a little bit more evenness, but given the density of the topology at this stage, it's not really too big of a deal. I'm not particularly worried about this. You can see it basically is not disrupting the curve at all. I'll just time-lapse cleaning up the topology for this section. Okay, great. So that's been cleaned up. You might notice we have a few triangles here and there, but it's really not that big of a deal because this is a flat surface. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're just going to flatten this out as well. This part here, we'll have that be flat. So in order to do that, what we can do is we can just go ahead and delete these edges. And then essentially just redraw them. Okay, and then that will be a bit easier for us to work with. So there's a little bit in here as well that we need to include where the holes don't start. And these parts here, like bars that go across, we'll have those as separate pieces, and that will make our lives a whole lot easier. We don't want to have to do those manually ourselves. That would be quite a pain. And it certainly would be possible, but I suspect there'll be separate pieces anyway. And again, anytime you can have something as a separate piece, I would definitely encourage you to do it. It's not always the best thing to do, because oftentimes you want to build things as they are in real life. We'll go ahead and extrude that in a little bit again. Okay, and then we're going to delete those faces because we don't need those anymore. Alrighty, perfect. And then we've got a little bit of cleanup to do here, but nothing major. Okay, perfect. And for the time being, just because, again, we don't want to add our bevels just yet, we're going to go ahead and just chuck in some creases here. Okay, just notice this edge here as well is a bit out, so we'll just straighten that up. Okay, there you go, and there is our cut-in for that. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and add in the next part of the grill. So first things first, we need to separate the panel line here. It kind of runs along this section. There's an actual entire, like, separated piece here. You can kind of see it in the blueprints here. It's a little bit higher than this line is, so I think I'll just add in an extra loop. And then we'll go ahead and separate this whole piece out. So we'll do another detach, edit mesh, and then detach. Okay, and then we can extract this bit out. So we're really splitting this up into a bunch of separate pieces now, but it's just going to help us. Then we've got to actually add in the grill part. Now, because the headlights are a little bit different, like I said, the shape is going to be a tad different, but I still want it to be roughly the same. So there's going to be a bit of a gap here, but the curve will come up, the angle here will come up at an angle, but it will go up straight along the headlight as well. So make sure you match that to whatever you're doing. If you're following the blueprints 100%, then match the blueprints. If not, then make it however you like. I am going to tweak mine a little bit. Alright, so before we do anything else, we want to bring this back a little bit because it's meant to be a tad bit of an inset. Then this bit just stays flush like that. I'm going to go ahead and harden this edge just to visualize it better. And then we're actually going to use, I think, all of these faces here and do an extrude inset. Okay. Then just a bit, just making sure that looks correct. Not too much. Okay. And obviously we don't have the other side, so we're going to have to just quickly go ahead and extend that. So again, using the multi-cut tool, Control and Shift to make sure that goes in the right direction, and then we can just delete that because we don't need that anymore. Okay, cool. We're going to do a quick extrude in on this section. Just a tad, at least on my references, doesn't go in too far. It really is quite a small amount. Good idea to kind of zoom out every now and then just to make sure it's looking correct. That seems about right to me. And again, we're going to delete these faces there because we don't want those. Okay, so that is the initial part of the grill. I need these corners here to actually be curved or rounded off, so I'm going to go ahead and do that just with 2 divisions. Increase the fraction up to probably 1. And again, just going to make sure these are merged, because they won't always be. In fact, we'll go ahead and target weld these to here just to give ourselves a quick clean up there. And then we're just going to delete some of these edges because they're not really doing anything for us. And then we'll do a quick fix here just to clean up that topology for us. Okay, I'm just going to flatten off these edges. That's just for my own personal OCD. Okay, cool. And then that is the start of that. And then we're going to need 2 more insets in here to add in the actual grills. If you look at this reference here, we've got these 2 just going along the middle. And so I'm going to come to the front view and just turn the blueprints back on and get the multi-cut tool out. And then I'm just going to, using these blueprints, put some edges in at the beginning points of these parts of the grill. I'm just sliding some of the edges that we have there already because we can make use of those. Okay. I want these to come up pretty close to the edge on ours. And they will both be situated around about here by the looks of it. We might need to do, at least on mine, a little bit of adjusting to have that be nice and even. Basically, we'll kind of want equal distance. Okay, and then we also want these to be equally wide as well. Okay, something kind of like that. And then we are just going to go ahead and do a simple extrude in again. Like so. Okay, something like that. We'll go ahead and delete these side ones again, and I'm going to go and turn off the blueprints now because we don't need those anymore once again. Now this shape here, it kind of comes in a little bit. If I show you here, you can see there's this little, it's kind of like with the door handle, right? It kind of comes in to a point, like a much thinner part. So the way we can do that is probably by doing another extrude down to roughly the sort of thickness we want it to be at. Something like so, not too thin, not too thick. Okay, I'm gonna have mine around about like that. And then we need these to extend across. If you want to, you can duplicate your part of the truck cabin to the other side, so you have both halves. And you won't have to do this step where we're cleaning up these extrudes. Okay, then we are literally just gonna go ahead and delete these edges, because we don't need those. Then we need to add a bevel to these edges here, just a little one. We'll go with 2 segments. We don't want really anything crazy. We'll just delete those faces. Okay, we're gonna add an extrude later. And that's the shape. So we need to do a little bit of cleanup with the topo here, because obviously this kind of situation isn't ideal. So we'll just delete the ones that we don't want. Okay, in fact, you know what? Let's clear all of this out and then just redraw it all. Sometimes that can be a bit easier. Oh. Okay, and then there's some simple fixes we can do, like up here. Here we'll go ahead and add in an extra edge, just to clean up that topo. Okay, we can have these go like so. Now with this method, we're going to need an extra edge in the middle there, but that's no problem whatsoever. We can go ahead and do that. And then we can just terminate those here. Okay, and there you go. That's that section entirely cleaned up. Okay, great. And that didn't really take much time at all. So you can see how once we start splitting things out, it begins to become a lot easier to actually work with the model. You know, when it was one piece, things that seemed a little daunting before are no longer so daunting. At least I don't think so. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and finish off this grill. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the transform on this for the time being, so we can just duplicate that across. This part here is actually done now, for the most part. Anything else we need to add is just going to be asymmetrical detail. So we can actually combine all of this now and have this as a finished piece. Right, it's really starting to take shape now. We're getting pretty close to being done with the cabin, I would say. Just going to double check these vertices are combined. They are not. Again, always a good idea to do that while you're working. Okay, let's give it another check. And there we go. Okay, cool. So now that we have that shape, what we're going to do is we will go ahead and put in the, if we look at our blueprint, sorry, these bars. So a quick and easy way to add the horizontal ones is actually just to use some of the mesh that we have already. So I'm going to duplicate it and then select these, hold down space, go to select, and then inverse, and then delete. Okay, so that gives us that shape. And then we can literally just pull this down. It could be that the shape is a little off, like so. But what we can do is, I'm just going to snap the pivot point to here, and then just pull that forward. So then that now aligns to the bottom side. We'll also just remove the creasing on this for the time being, because we don't want that. Okay, and then I'll also just delete half, so we can just work on making sure it fits for us. Flag that off as well. Okay, and then we'll just come to the front view to make sure that we're getting this right. So in the blueprints, they've made these look really thick, but they're really not quite as thick as this. This is a bit insane. They seem to be a bit more... actually, not too far off. maybe a bit more like that. Okay, this grill is quite wide open. And we don't want that to be entirely flush with the exterior. That kind of comes in a little bit, maybe sits around about like here. And then we're just going to give this a quick little extrude and have this contact. Just about. Okay. We have that come in a tad more. Then we'll pull that down and we'll add our second one. And that kind of just comes to here. But it does kind of intersect here a little bit and then continue. Okay. Then we'll go ahead and reset the transforms so we can duplicate these across for ourselves. And combine, and then edit mesh and then merge. Okay. Quickly check if we have any duplicate vertices. We don't. And then pretty much what we're going to do is just extrude these till they contact the back. Like so. Then just do a mesh display and reverse. And there we go. Then to do the horizontal ones, that one is a lot easier. We can actually just go ahead and create a cube. Now these need to be a little thinner than the rest. Around about something like that. Okay. And it looks like there's 5 of these in total, one of them actually running down the middle. And these are inset a little bit from the horizontal ones, but they do go to the back. Okay, so we'll have these come up to the top and then meet the bottom. Like so. I might just pull this one up a tad so that spacing is a little bit more even. Okay, so that's the first one. Now let's add the rest. So we just want 2 on this side. Like so. Okay, because this is curved, you might need to pull this back a bit, but that's okay. Just keep this aligned with the back of here, and you can also adjust the rotation a tad if you want that to be a nice even fit. Looking at it now, I think these probably are meant to all be one piece, like one molded piece of plastic, but I think for the sake of this tutorial we won't go into that, just to save ourselves some trouble, seeing it is a bit more, or meant to be a bit more beginner friendly. Okay, cool, so that's those 2. We'll go ahead and combine them. Holding down space, then mesh, and then combine. You can also do that up here. Okay. Modify, reset transformations. And then we'll put a -1 in the scale on X. Oh, duplicate it first with Control D. Then -1 in X. Okay, and then that adds our grill. What we can then do is, I'm going to go ahead and select all of these. Actually, what we'll do first, we'll just combine these vertical ones. And we can add some bevels to those later, but for the time being we'll leave that. Okay, cool. And there's some details in the grill here, but we'll add those later as well because they're quite small. Okay, and then one other little thing that I think I missed is it turns out actually this part does need to go in a tad. Not too much though. This edge here, I mean, just like the one below it. So I'll just add in an extra loop. Just a little one there. Then we'll just pull that back as well. And there is meant to be a little bit of a gap. So we'll go ahead and delete some of those. Okay, and then we'll just harden that edge and give that a crease as well. Okay, amazing. Let's go ahead and duplicate all of this just to see what that looks like on both sides. Starting to have a few more objects in our outliner now. Oh, not these ones. We don't have bevels there for the time being. But there you go, that's pretty much the front grille made. There is a little space for the number plate here, which we can go ahead and add as well. Let's create another cube. Scale that up, bring our blueprints back. And then that just sits in here. It looks quite square here, but looking at the reference, actually, I think the number plate that goes on front is the rounded part. This part just goes back square. So we'll just push that back. And it probably comes out, or follows the rotation. Something like that. Let's just make sure that works correctly for us there. Okay. We'll add an edge loop in here just to make sure this is following the curvature properly. Okay, looks like this side's coming out a little too far, but that's okay. Just give that a quick adjustment. Okay, now get us to follow the curve even better. We'll just quickly bevel it. We'll add extra couple of divisions there. Okay, and this we want to come back about as far as the rest. So we'll just slide that back into place. Maybe snap that like so. Okay, perfect. Then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this. Okay, just select these front faces only. Hold down space, go to select and then inverse. So we can make a copy of that for ourselves. Extrude out just a little bit. This is going to be where the number plate goes. Pretty thin. And then this is going to have rounded corners. So we'll just select all of those. Bevel. Give it 2 segments. Do some more if you want to. It's up to you. I'm just going to go with 2. And then this just has a little bit of roundness to it. Something like that. Okay. I am just going to come to the front view. And then let's clean up the topology on this. So I'm going to add in some edges. And the reason I'm adding them like this is because when you have curved corners like this, if you don't have supporting edges just away from where the curve starts, the curve tends to slip a little bit, if that makes sense. You know, instead of just having them run straight down like this. Sometimes I won't do this if the topology is a bit too complicated. But in cases like this, where we can afford to do it, then I normally will. And then we can just fix the n-gons here by just having one come into the corner. Okay, then I'll just shift, double click, select all of those, mesh display, and then soften edge. Just to give that its proper shape. Okay, cool, that's the front of our truck. Quite a lot of progress made in a relatively short amount of time. There's a lot more detail that goes behind this grille, but we can add that later. For the time being, we're just working on the bodywork. Okay, one of the last major things we can do to the cabin is we can actually add the creases on top. So there's this here. Well, they're not really creases. They're kind of like little insets. So we have these that run all the way down. Okay, and then there's some that run most of the way, but they kind of stop before getting all the way to the end. So we'll go ahead and delete the other side because we don't want to use that for the time being. The top of our reference isn't going to be too handy here. So this is something that we're going to have to do ourselves. So the first one, to my eye, seems to start around about here. And we already have this edge going mostly straight, but we're going to need this to be a bit straighter down here. So I'm going to just deselect some of these, and then just snap our pivot point to there, and then hold down Control and Shift, and just get that to go like that. perfectly straight, and then we'll then have that come to meet there, and then give that a quick straighten as well, just to make sure that's going directly straight. There we go. Okay, cool. We're then going to need to do the same with this edge here. So we'll just straighten that off too. Again, deselecting some of these. Get that to come straight, and then straight down as well. We'll be able to get away with that, I think, doing it ourselves. Always good just to double check, to check if we have it going correct. There we go. And then we can probably get away with just deleting this edge. This one we'll have to keep. Okay, now before we go any further, it's at this stage we need this kind of inset here, right? Which is just before the bodywork kind of meets the rim of the windshield. So before we take this any further, we're going to go ahead and add that in. So we'll just select these edges. Okay. Then we'll just extrude in. Like so. Just a tad. Making sure we're getting that to be as accurate as we can. It doesn't come in too drastically. And it will kind of vary depending on the exact model. But then these should come forward some. So we're just going to pull that forward ourselves. Okay, maybe do a bit of that edge flow if we need to. Okay, but it's not too much, just a little bit as you can see. And then we can add in this part. So we'll go ahead and grab all of those faces. Okay, and then we just want this to come in a little bit, but really not too much. Okay, nice, that's our first one in. And it's going to get easier as we come across because these are nearly going straight anyway. So we need one in the middle and then one on either side. So just to make this easier for us, let's go ahead and duplicate this across. Just so we can get a better picture of what this is looking like. Okay, and then I think what I'll do is I'll actually make some guides rather than us having to cut this first. And the reason why, the shape is quite simple, so we don't really need the guide for that. It's more to get the spacing correct. Okay? Before you cut anything. Because then you know, and it's much, much easier to space these out perfectly evenly than it is to do that just by cutting edges. Again, these do come quite far forward. Now to somewhere like this. Okay. And then there is one perfectly in the middle. But they're not too wide, maybe something like this. Okay. And then we just want the next one about as evenly placed as possible. Maybe here, actually. Then we can actually use these edges. That'd be quite nice. We'll put that in the middle. And then that's pretty even placement already. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll just delete that side, and then we will use these as our guides. Just going to rotate them a bit so we can see exactly where we're pointing. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and first of all, we'll just straighten this off. That is pretty damn straight already. And then we'll just straighten these ones too. Okay. Might as well straighten up the rest of these while we're at it. Okay, and that can kind of just stay as is. We'll do a bit of editing edge flow. Okay, we'll keep the guides for now because we want to know exactly where we are doing this to. So we'll start with these ones. And then we'll come all the way to the back. Okay, we can go ahead and delete these now because we don't need them anymore. And we know these are the faces we want to extrude in. So we'll just do a little bit of an extrude. Same amount as last time. Not too much, just enough to give us the indication of it when we subdivide. Something like that. Okay, we're going to need to do a bit of cleanup here to remove these extra faces again. Okay. There you have it. We could, if we wanted to, add a crease to the exterior here. but that might be a little bit too harsh. Not 100% necessary. I will just for the time being. Okay, but then still nice clean topology. And then we'll duplicate that across to see if that's looking good for us, and there you go. That's the creases on top of the hood. Okay, so I think that's going to leave it there for today's episode, guys. Trying to make a bit more progress today. We're pretty much done with the cabin at this point. We're very, really nearly done. There's some stuff we need to do at the back. We need to sort of close this all off. We need to put the windshield in and everything. But as far as the bodywork goes, this is pretty much it. We're just kind of detailing now and then putting in windows, and then we can get on to doing the back. I think in the next episode we'll add the windshields, and close this up. We'll add the back section, and if we can, we'll start blocking in the rear as well. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please let us know if you have any questions, any feedback whatsoever. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was helpful, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.